Okay, welcome to the lab session of this week's PSC 603. This lab is going to be focused on forecasting, specifically looking at revenue forecasting. So what I will do is I will go through some examples, and then what I'm going to do is share my work with you, and then you will receive an assignment tomorrow morning, sometime tomorrow. That'll be due by next Thursday. I believe I said the day was the 14th. So let me pull up the example. Give me just a second. So as you can see, this is very similar to the work we've done with revenues before, but what I've done is I've actually sharing what I worked with last year. And what we're trying to do is figure out, again, current year and future year projections on these revenues. In other words, what we actually project to collect this year, and then also then figure out, well, then how does that relate to what we expect next year? So what I have done here is that this forecast would be at the end of March. So you'll see that I have through that column A is the fund number, column B is the category number, column C is the account information. And then I have column D and it says 18P9. So in financial accounting and government accounting, typically you number each month a period. And so July would be period 1, August would be period 2, and so on. So March is period 9. And what this column shows is the year-to-date revenue as of the end of March in fiscal year 2018. The next column over, column E, shows the full year actual revenue in fiscal year 18. And then the same information is shared for fiscal years 19 and 20. So you have 18P9, 18 actual, 19P9, 19 actual, 20P9, and 20 actual. So you have full information for the past 3 full fiscal years of where revenues were at the end of March and where revenues were at the end of the given fiscal year. So what we need to do is from this information, use this to provide historic context so that we can project where revenues will be at the end of the current fiscal year based on historic background and the actual revenues that we had collected as of the end of March in March of fiscal year 2021. So I have an equation I've got to put in here. And you see here, I have 2 different columns. I have 21 PROJA and 21 PROJB. And the reason I do that is that I want to try out 2 different calculations. And then what I'm going to do is take those calculations and then average them out to come up with my final projection. So for the first calculation, I'm going to base it just based off what happened in the last fiscal year. So it's a division question because we divide it into the share of the difference of the share. What you want to find out is you're finding out the share where you were in March compared to the total. And then you apply that in the current year. So it would equal J2 divided by the equation H2 divided by I2. So K2 equals J2 divided by parentheses H2 divided by I2. And you see it there in the formula field. Hit enter. And it gives you a total of 23,850,569. What I next want to do for projection B is that I want to go back and use all 3 prior years and determine their average share. So we're now working with L2, and that equals J2 divided by parentheses average D2 divided by E2, comma, F2 divided by G2, comma, H2 divided by I2. So I'm kind of rounding it out to try to find out what the difference would be compared to just looking at from one past year or looking at from 3 prior years. Click enter. Tells me I made a mistake, which I did because I should have added an extra parentheses. So it caught it. And it comes out a little lower. So what I want to do, since I've got two numbers that are relatively close to each other, I want to just take the average of these two numbers. So equal average K2 comma L2. And that gives me an average. So I have made a pretty simple extrapolation equation. Yes, Jillian.
Could you expand the headings at the top? I just can't to make sure that I'm understanding the headings all the way across.
Okay.
Thank you.
Like that? Is that what you want?
Now, what I'm seeing is a drop down, and I don't see the
Okay,
heading
so let me take that out. Let me take the freezer off. Okay.
Thank you.
There you go. That good? Okay. So now I compare that to my projected, my adopted was 24,550. Now, what you want to do when you're doing these forecasts and projections is you want to round them. And so I'm going to round it to the nearest 1,000. So I equal round this number. I believe it's 3 for thousands. Could be -3. Yeah, there we go, -3. So round M2 comma -3, so it rounds it up to the nearest 1,000. And that's what I want to do with most of these revenues, okay? Now I have my proposed for next year, and you can see that there's a difference because all I've done is I've filled in the proposed with the adopted for the current year. And this should say FY21 projected, sorry, FY22 proposed. So let's say in my notes that I was told that there's going to be a 2% increase in assessed value. What that would tell me is I could go back and I could increase the projected for next by 1.02, and that gives my number for next year. So let me do another one. Let me do taxes prior year. I'm going to calculate it the same way. So I can basically just copy and paste these three calculations. And as you can see, I have a pretty high number because the calculations got me coming in about 898,000. I could be conservative here, but I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to round the projection. 899,000. Let's say my note percent says it's going to be a 5% decrease in prior year collections. So I would equal that times 0.95, which is 100% minus 5%. And that gets me that number. Next one's vehicle taxes. So this one again, numbers look consistent. And as you can see here, it comes in at 3,390,000. Copy and paste my projected again. I'm going to say no change in vehicle taxes. So that just means I equal P equals O. I've got $3,391,000. This equation you can use for most of them. These three equations that I've set up here in K, L, and M, you can use for most of the revenues. There are those that you have to be wary of, like payment in lieu of tax. That's a set amount. So if I include this in there, I will set in the notes that this is a set amount, and I'll give more instructions. So I know that my projection is going to be whatever the actual budget is, because that's tax that's based on taxes that we're collecting from our utilities. So I know that's going to be the actual amount. So it's not going to change.
You said it was the actual amount, okay, from the adopted, okay.
Right, yes. So here with cable franchise, I'm just going to adjust this one to reflect the projected, because there's not going to be any change. Let me go down and look at local option sales tax. I'm actually going to do three of them. I'm going to do electric sales tax and then the two local option sales taxes. So electric sales tax is no change. And let me say I'm going to do 3% increase. Both of them are going to increase by 3%. So this equation here, these equations in K, L, and M, which I will share with you, are the key to really doing the forecasting. Now you may have some like here, like wine and beer option on row 12. As you can see, you haven't gotten any of, you've only got the information for the last 3 years. But it hadn't been paid as of year 9, so you don't exactly know how much you're going to get. In a circumstance like this, you just keep your projection at the current year's projected level. It seems reasonable compared to these three, so that's what you do. And you just leave everything else alone. But you then got the ABC revenues from Nash and Edgecombe County. Sorry. Copy and paste the wrong cell. And that tells you that. So you can already see I've got some revenues that are below what was adopted, like in property tax, and then I have some that are greater. And that's kind of how revenues work. Some revenues outperform and some revenues underperform. And the goal is that hopefully it all nets out to where you still collect as much or more than what you anticipated collecting in a given fiscal year. So I'm going to cut it down to probably about 50 or 60 accounts when I do it, when I set it up for y'all. Y'all will not be doing all of them. But what you will need to do as well is you will need to also do a pivot table that summarizes by category. Okay? So that is what I had to show you for the lab. Are there any questions?
Could you just quickly review the KLM equations?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for K, and you see up here, K equals J2 divided by, and then you put in parentheses, H2 divided by I2, and then close parentheses. L2 equals J2, and you divide this by parentheses, the average of the prior 3 year shares, which is then D2 divided by E2, comma F2 divided by G2, comma H2 divided by I2. Close parentheses on that. And then M is the average of K2 and L2.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go back to L. You just wanted to see it. There's the equation in the formula field for L.
And did you say that the P is the revenue for that, the end of March, that period, and then is the actual, that's for the entire year so far?
That's correct. No, P is for the as of the end of March. Like 20, P9 is as of the end of March 2020. 20 actuals as of the end of the fiscal year, and then 21 P9 is as of the end of March of the current fiscal year. Brittany's correct. So that it's projected divided by actual. Yes.
So the P stands for projected at 9 months. I
No,
guess.
P stands for the P stands for period 9 months.
Oh, okay. But it's a
Period
project.
9.
But
If it's project, sorry, go ahead.
But is it a projection or is it like the actual at that point?
The actual at that point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, columns D through J are all actual information.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we will cover this again next week in the follow-up lab, which I'll record. And you will have until, if you have any questions, just email or text me.
Did you do the
Um,
pivot table, Dr. Hunter?
Say again?
Did you do the pivot table already?
No, I did not. I wasn't going to do I wasn't doing the pivot table this time.
Oh, okay.
It'll just be part of the assignment.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what I expect with the pivot table. Okay, well, that concludes our lab. Thank you all very much. And have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Jordan.